Call the meeting to order of the Wilmington City Council. I'd like to welcome all those who are with us here this evening and all those taking an interest in their government at home. Thank you for being here. This time I'm going to call on our chaplain from the Wilmington Police Department, Sergeant Ron Evans, to please give us an invocation, and then if everyone would stand and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Sergeant Evans.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your continued grace and mercy that you bestow upon us each day. We ask that you hold us close to your bosom and hold us tight in your arms. We pray for this council. Give them wisdom as they prepare to make decisions that will be beneficial to every citizen in Wilmington. We thank you for those who watch over us, and we thank you for your protection from the seen and the unseen. We pray this prayer in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order of business is our consent agenda, items 1 through 5. Are there any items that any council member would like to hear separately? If not, what are the wishes of this council? We have a motion to approve by Mayor Pro Tem Barnett, second by Council Member Andrews. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is our public information segment. We have 6 speakers that have signed up to speak with us this evening. Each speaker will be allotted 5 minutes. The clerk will be keeping the time. And so our first speaker this evening is Mr. Jake Martin, who's calling for a ceasefire resolution in Israel and Palestine. Martin?
Hello, my name is Jake Martin. I'm a husband, father, and proud resident of Wilmington, and I'm here tonight to add my voice to the call for this council to pass a ceasefire resolution. At every city council meeting for the past 2 months, you've been addressed by multiple speakers asking you for the same thing. These speakers have all described in vivid detail the atrocities committed against the Palestinian people. They've listed off stomach-turning statistics about death tolls, displacement, starvation, amputations, all in the hopes that it would make you feel what we feel and inspire you to act. You'll hear from several more in a few minutes, all of whom I deeply respect and admire. But I'm not going to do any of that tonight for one simple reason. I don't know if any of you actually care. I would love to be proven wrong. But I can't hear your private conversations or your innermost thoughts, and your public statements about it are virtually non-existent. And so until I have something to suggest that the moral side of this issue holds any sway with you, I can't bring myself to plead for your sympathy. Instead, I'm going to frame this the only way that I know it will matter to you, which is how it affects you and your political careers. And in that sense, it all boils down to the numbers. At the last meeting, a pro-Israel speaker made the argument that this conflict is an international matter outside the purview of this governing body. And I think that's hilarious, because the actions of the Israeli military are directly linked to everyone in this room in a quantifiable way I think you'll appreciate: money. As you might know, every year, the US sends an average of $3.8 billion of aid to Israel. And based on that number, we can extrapolate roughly how much taxpayer money comes from every city in the US directly to Israel. That number for Wilmington is just under $2 million a year. $2 million of your taxpayers' money every year. If I recall correctly, we spent about 10 minutes at the last council meeting discussing whether $15,000 was too much to spend on a selfie station. Seems disproportionate if you ask me. Now keep in mind that 2 million number is based on our average annual aid to Israel and does not account for the $17.6 billion that Congress is in the process of passing right now. I'll let you do the math on how much of that is coming directly from us. If you think the people of this city will remain complacent while the money is plucked from our pockets and deposited directly into the barrels of Israeli sniper rifles without so much as a word of condemnation from the people who supposedly represent us, you are tragically mistaken. Which leads me to another set of numbers that I'm sure will interest you, being the savvy politicians that you are. Polling numbers and age demographics. As I'm sure you're aware, we in the US are in the midst of the largest opinion swing on Israel literally since the creation of Israel. Not that long ago, it's younger than most of our grandparents, but still. 68% of Americans are now in favor of a ceasefire. If you've paid any attention to US opinions on Israel in the last 4 decades, that number will sound impossible to you, but it's real and it's only going to grow. And we know this because the demographic that has seen the largest opinion swing on Israel is 18 to 29-year-olds. If your ears are perking up at that number, you know how key of a demographic that is for you, both in terms of your future electability and also as a bellwether of change in this country. Pro-Israel groups like AIPAC and the Anti-Defamation League know this all too well, which is why they're currently lobbying so hard to get TikTok banned, so that young people no longer have a platform to share their overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian views. In January, The Economist released a poll where it asked, do you believe there is a genocide happening in Gaza right now? 49% of responders age 18 to 29 replied yes, as opposed to 27% not sure and just 24% no. If you're looking for your canary in the coal mine to tell you it's time to reevaluate your position, there it is. Ultimately, my message to you is that nobody in elected office right now gets to skate on this issue uncommitted. This is shaping up to be the defining atrocity of a generation. We are going to get a ceasefire resolution on the agenda for this council. Each of you will have to go on record and state in simple yes or no terms whether you will use the authority of your elected office to call for the end of a genocide unwillingly funded in part by your very own constituents. We are here. We are not going away, and our demand is simple. Cease fire now. Thank you.
Next speaker is Suzanne Wartman, who will be speaking to us about a ceasefire in Gaza.
Good evening, and thank you. My name is Suzanne Wartman. Wilmington has been my home for 18 years. I'm a proud Lebanese American, a mother, and a nurse midwife. You've heard from so many of our neighbors about why Wilmington should or should not weigh in on what is happening in Gaza. You have heard about the violence there. You have heard about the threats of anti-Arab, Islamophobic, and anti-Semitic violence right here in our community. So when will we stop asking you to break your silence? We will stop when you ask that American-made bombs stop dropping, when American-trained IDF soldiers stop kidnapping Palestinian children, when the drones and planes supplied by our tax dollars stop terrorizing families in Gaza. We will stop when you choose to do what is right instead of what is easy. When you choose to lead us with bravery, compassion, and respect for humanity and international law. Since the last city council meeting, nearly 11% of New Hanover's Democratic voters chose no preference over President Biden in the primary election. On Saturday, the county Democrats voted to advance a ceasefire resolution to the state party convention. There is growing sentiment among our neighbors that we have a responsibility and power to demand a permanent ceasefire and a diplomatic solution to justice and peace. As a nurse and as a midwife, I work to ensure women live their healthiest lives and mothers and babies get the best start. Good beginnings are essential to thriving communities. As an active member of the New Hanover County Resiliency Task Force, I know this city has signed on as a partner in our work to build a compassionate and resilient community where everyone can thrive. So I stand before you tonight, pleading you to consider these facts and take an active part in ending this death and destruction of a people and their land. 364 midwives, nurses, physicians, EMTs, and other healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. 37 mothers are killed every day in Gaza. A woman who underwent fertility treatments for 11 years was recently the sole survivor of an overnight bombing of her tent in Rafah. Her husband and their precious baby twins died in that attack while they were sleeping. At the Emirati Hospital in Rafah, 16 preterm babies have died of malnutrition in the last 5 weeks. At least 11 other children have died in hospital from malnutrition and dehydration. 186 ambulances in Gaza have been destroyed. 160 aid workers have been killed by Israeli forces. 13,000 Palestinian children have been killed. 1 in 3 children under 2 years old is now acutely malnourished in Gaza. UNICEF now says that every single Palestinian child in Gaza has experienced trauma. Only 12 partially functioning hospitals remain out of 36. Only 2 of these 12 remaining hospitals provide maternity services, with about 180 women giving birth every day. To give you context, on our busiest day here in Wilmington, there might be 15 or 20 births. Gaza is now the most dangerous place in the world for children. Al-Shifa Hospital was raided again by the IDF in a surprise attack Sunday night, while about 30,000 Gazans continue to seek refuge in the hospital complex. How much longer will you remain silent? How much longer will you go about your everyday lives with this ambient genocide and pretend like we have no part in these atrocities? Next week, in this building, Cinematique will screen The Zone of Interest, set during the Holocaust. The film follows the commandant at Auschwitz and his family as they build a dream life in a house and garden next to the camp. The filmmaker, when accepting the Oscar for this year's Best International Film, said, "All our choices were made to reflect and confront us in the present." Not to say, look what they did then, but rather, look what we do now. I would like to remind you of what Ashley Daniels said here at this podium a few weeks ago, using the words of another activist, Airman Aaron Bushnell. Many of us would like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery? Or the Jim Crow South, or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? And the answer is, we're doing it right now. Free, free Palestine.
Next speaker. Next speaker is Miss Eileen Ashton. Eileen.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Eileen Ashton. I live at 16 South 7th Street. I own the adjacent property, 14 South 7th Street. I've been here since 1986. When I moved, I had to purchase the lot so that I could park, as there was no parking on the west side of 7th Street. A few years ago, the city, without any notification to the residents, decided to add parking to the west side of the street. A business owner who has off-street parking and would not be affected requested the change. When I questioned, I got bullied and harassed by city staff. They deemed my south side entrance unusable. They pulled deeds to my property. They did not do this to any other homeowner. In fact, the property directly across the street from mine has the exact pad entrance as mine, and it was not deemed unusable. I let the city know it was unsafe and dangerous. I was ignored. I was told if I had problems, I would need to call the police. although I didn't feel I should have to do that. Now the problem has intensified, escalated, not only for my safety, but the safety of neighbors and everyone's property. We had the first that I witnessed encountered of a person shouting at me and innocent bystanders. I feel I am now being targeted by the police. What the city said I had to do. If the police had an issue, they need to talk to the city, not to the citizen. The city caused the problem. The police keep using the statement, it's discretionary. Safety is not discretionary. I requested and was provided by the city parking manager, city code, vehicles have to be parked entirely within the designated lines and no more than 12 inches from the curbs. Vehicles consistently park over the designated parking lines, causing additional concerns for my safety and vehicle damage. Neighbors have to hit cars in order to exit their properties. My most recent call to the non-emergency number, several things were said and done. The officer, first of all, my area was blocked. The officer told the owner of the vehicle that they did not have to move their vehicle. They insisted a second time they did not have to move their vehicle. Again, it's a safety issue. Officer said, "Don't waste my time." I was told by city staff to call the police if there was a problem. The last time that officers were there were 4 cars sent for a parking issue. I'm jumping all over, I'm sorry. Sorry about this. I may have to just send you the information because I think I'm having problems addressing this situation at this time. But, okay. I did feel that the officer arrived with an attitude because they started to express, what's the problem, saying I called them 13 times. So they knew why I called. I called the 911 to get the report. It was actually 11 times that I called because there is a problem. The use of I don't want to, I don't have to, I'm not, it's discretionary. Again, it's a safety issue, and it's not discretionary. Police made the comment, because I had said about a sailboat being in the area. There's other people that use this particular driveway. It's an easement. Again, the city, its spaces are designated to, you're supposed to be within the lines, so it's easier to park, maneuver your vehicles. And it's a haphazard situation when people are parking way above. You can't turn. It's a safety when cars are coming. They go by very fast. And it, causes more concern for my safety and other safeties and vehicle safeties. Vehicles can't see me. I can't see them. Vehicles today are oversized SUVs and trucks. I've had to learn to deal with parking and maneuvering my vehicle, but adding haphazard parking only contributes to the danger. I have never complained to the non-emergency number for people parking in front of my 2 properties, but the only times that I do, I was, not addressed respectfully. I also need to find out, because the city told me that the designated lines, you have to park the entire vehicle within. The police officer telling me as long as there's half a wheel over the line, it's okay. It's okay if a whole line is okay. Sadly, the attitude is it doesn't affect you. It doesn't matter, it affects me. I have more, but I know my time is out, and I hope that something can be resolved. I hope the city does, work with me. And I want to let you know, I come from a long family history of law enforcement, deputy chief of police, sheriffs, uncles, great uncles, nephews, cousins, who are all police officers at one time. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker is Mr. Roger Cook, adding resolution to council's April 2nd, 2024 meeting agenda, ceasefire resolution.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and honorable council members. I'm Roger Cook. I'm a Wilmington resident. I'm a retired attorney. I appear before you this evening to request that you instruct by resolution our representatives in Congress to tell our president to demand a full and permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and Palestine, and to demand that food, water, fuel, and all medical supplies be immediately made available to all who need it there. I have 3 points to make to you in support of my request. The attacks, including bombings and ground assaults by the State of Israel and its imposition of food, water, and medical supply blockades against at least 1.5 million Gazans, are disproportionate responses to the horrific, ruthless October 7th terrorist attack. While going after the fighters, Israel has, according to congressional testimony given on February 29th by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, taken the lives of over 25,000 women and children. Over 60% of the residences in Gaza have been bombed into rubble. Almost all Gazan schools, water treatment plants, hospitals, universities, and other structures and institutions have now been destroyed by the hundreds of Israeli bombardments on these civilian areas. Over 85% of the Gazan population, numbering 1.5 million people, are homeless and at immediate threat of death by starvation, disease, assassination by Israeli forces at recognized food sites, or by the imminent attack by Israeli forces on them in their tents in Rafah. Now, Israeli attacks in sheer body count numbers compared to the horrific, brutal attacks of October 7th are of a lethality at least 20 times greater in civilian deaths, 20 times, 50 times greater in non-fatal civilian casualties. And potentially, if there is widespread famine or a large-scale attack on the inhabitants of Rafah, currently numbering 1.5 million, it would be 1,000 times greater. My second point, it is our duty to prevent genocide. If the brave citizens of England had not stepped in to save my Jewish mother from execution by the Nazi government in 1939, she and thousands of other Jewish children would have been murdered swiftly. Her only crime was being Jewish. The slaughter of innocents who share an ethnic or religious identity is the very definition of genocide. Now, Hamas's victims on October 7th were clearly targeted because of their identity. Israel's victims, over the now 4.5 months of assaults, have, with only a narrow group of exceptions, similarly been targeted because of their identity. Not one, for example, not one of the over 12,000 Palestinian children killed to date by Israeli bombings had any hand in the horrors of October 7th. They simply possessed an ethnic identity as Palestinians. Third, demanding that all parties, including the State of Israel, cease all hostilities and immediately provide essential food, water, fuel, and medical supplies and protection is not anti-Semitic. It's the right thing to do. The Jewish faith neither mandates nor permits the slaughter of innocents. I know that. I'm Jewish. The ruthless, brutal Hamas guerrilla fighters didn't share that prohibition on the slaughter of innocents, obviously. The current government of Israel knows that slaughter is not permitted, but it engages in it anyway. Israeli policy expresses an imperial ambition to depopulate the whole of Gaza and the occupied West Bank in the service of establishing a unified Israeli state throughout all of historical Palestine. This is wholly without legal basis and violates numerous tenets of international law. Now, the Israeli government's fidelity is not at all to Judaism, only to its narrow, self-serving vision of a depopulated Gaza and West Bank occupied by only a single historical group at whatever cost to the millions of human beings present there since the beginning or predating the Christian era. So I want to urge this council, I want to thank this council for having heard us these past few weeks. I want to thank you for having listened to my statement tonight. I will shortly hand to our city clerk over 150 written statements by your constituents asking that you now do what over 100 cities have done. Greensboro has done, Durham's done, Carver has done. Let's go on record and stop the killing. Stop the killing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Miss Emily Jagger.
Hi, I'm Emily Jagger. I'm a resident of Wilmington, North Carolina, the chapter president of the North Carolina Democratic Party Jewish Caucus in New Hanover and Brunswick, and the rabbi's wife at the local conservative synagogue B'nai Israel congregation, one of the many established and long-standing Jewish community institutions of Wilmington, some of which are over a century old, and the community which is standing behind me today and has supported me in coming here. We are for peace and everyone living in dignity. And I'm speaking here today reluctantly about this call for City Council to sign a pro-ceasefire resolution. I'm speaking reluctantly because I think that this resolution, or any resolution, and the advocates who have been pushing this issue in City Council are a disruption and a distraction from the good work that City Council does, creating a better city every day and quality of life for all. And I know that I am just adding another 5 minutes to that distraction. However, because of the theater behind me and the continuing push to insert this resolution into City Council's local agenda, I'm speaking today. First, I want to thank City Council for not voting on this resolution so far and ask you to continue this stance. If ceasefire were easy to accomplish, our national leaders would have brokered it already. And in fact, Hamas made their attack on October 7th during a ceasefire, so clearly it's not a very effective policy. The inflammatory language of this resolution, accusing Israel and even some of the people here in this room of genocide, is not supported by any mainstream political party on the national level, on the state level, and it's an invitation to increased anti-Semitic sentiment, harassment, and violence against the Jewish community, both in Wilmington and nationally. The Anti-Defamation League has reported a 360% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the US since October 7th. And as a Jewish person living in Wilmington since October 7th, my family and I have personally experienced this harassment online, harassment from a senior medical practitioner in my family's healthcare network who had access to my family, including my child's private records. And we have witnessed the vandalism of our sister synagogue, Temple of Israel. All this despite the fact that we have no authority, connection, or influence within the Israeli government, military, or the decision makers, but simply for being leaders in the Jewish community, for being Jews that live openly in Wilmington. The rhetoric of this resolution, which has been repeated by those behind me for government officials who also freely call for genocide against Jewish people living in Israel, during protests shouting from the river to the sea, have empowered this anti-Semitic behavior against Jews in this community. And Jews are not the only victims of this divisive rhetoric. This constant divisiveness also contributes to incidents of Islamophobia, such as the stabbing of an innocent 6-year-old in Illinois earlier this year, Wadea Al-Fayoum. We don't want this tragedy or any other attacks repeated in Wilmington, our home. This group, who have repeatedly presented this resolution, claim that because some of them are Jewish, they are the Jewish perspective. However, none of the mainstream Jewish organizations in this city agree with this resolution, including my congregation, Temple of Israel, and multiple nonprofits which contribute not only to the Jewish community here, but to the well-being of the entire city. Additionally, this resolution uses unverified information, including death rates of Palestinians that were provided by Hamas, the terrorist organization that instigated this conflict on October 7th with an unprovoked attack on Israel during an agreed-upon ceasefire. By signing this resolution, City Council would be inviting Hamas, its policy, its horrifying actions of rape, murder, and destruction of innocents, its manipulation of civilian death tolls to its own aims, to the table, and to the legacy of City Council's policy. Is that the legacy that you want? Is that the legacy that we want for Wilmington? Therefore, I ask City Council to continue supporting the unity, cohesion, and safety of the Wilmington community that is vital for effective governance by not adopting or even considering this resolution or any resolution on this topic, and to continue prioritizing the needs of Wilmington residents in your work, and not let Hamas or their amplifiers write the narrative on this sensitive issue just because they are loud and have markers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Our last speaker is August Shaler, addition of call for ceasefire to city agenda.
Thank you. Hello, City Council members. My name is August Umi Shapiro. I'm an active member of the city's art community, a worker in the local film industry, and proudly Jewish. My family has been living in Israel-Palestine for generations. My cousin Abba Solomon Aban even served as Israel's foreign minister, something that you, Councilmember Joyner, might understand, having deep roots in our own eastern North Carolina. So hear me when I express the gravity of this resolution and the importance of this dialogue. As someone who voted for many of those of you who sit behind that desk today, I ask that you add to the city's agenda a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Your constituents have demanded the adoption of this resolution for months now, and from the passionate voices of Wilmingtonians, we have heard facts and fears. Councilmember Barnett, you have stated that you are gathering information on this issue. That's fair. Actions should be motivated by our facts. Facts such as there being well over 30,000 civilian deaths in a region of land less than half the size of New Hanover County, with 13,000 of those being children. Facts like how last year more than $66 million worth of exports were shipped to the state of Israel from the port of Wilmington. Facts like how the New Hanover County Democratic Party Convention voted just this last weekend overwhelmingly in favor of this resolution. Facts like how more than 100 cities across the country have already passed their own resolutions calling for a ceasefire, including 3 in our own state, Durham, Greensboro, and Carrboro. Let these facts motivate action. We've heard fears about this resolution, fears of increased hatred. Councilmember Rivenbark, you have expressed fears of appearing anti-Semitic. This fear tells us that we shouldn't get involved, that it's far away and doesn't concern us, that by making a statement, we risk the growth of anti-Semitism. The core of all these fears boil down to a single concern about the well-being of our own community in Wilmington. I personally have been the target of hatred and anti-Semitism my entire life. I've had rocks thrown at me, my yarmulke has been stolen from my head, and my own mother was threatened with termination from her job for wearing a Star of David. I know what it is to be afraid, and I can tell you that every single time hatred reveals itself, it never goes away by simply ignoring it or even heeding to the fear it inspires. You have to address it directly. You have to condemn violence and hatred. If we truly want the best for our beautiful port city, we absolutely cannot continue ignoring this issue. There needs to be a dialogue. There needs to be a vote. There needs to be a vote from the City Council. As our elected representatives, you have power to put pressure onto our state and federal systems. You have a civic and professional duty to stand against violence and hatred. Have courage and demand peace. Add this resolution to the city agenda and call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Next item of business is our public hearings. Item PH1 is an ordinance directing the housing inspector to vacate, close, and repair or demolish the dwelling at 1515 Ann Street as unfit for human habitation pursuant to Article 5, Chapter 16 of the Wilmington City Code, and directing that a notice be placed thereon. At this time, this was also continued from Council's September 19th, 2023 meeting. At this time, I'd like to recognize the City Manager, Mr. Caudle. Mr. Caudle.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Brian Renner, our Chief Code Enforcement Officer, will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. Some of you were not here last time. We briefly talked about this house at 1515 Ann Street. What we're looking to do tonight is to request that Council deny this ordinance. That'll send it back to my staff to manage it. Just as a reminder, we'll kind of run through it real quick. This is a house at the corner of Ann and 16th Street. The property sold in September following the council meeting that we had. The new owner already has a permit, has gutted out the house and is starting work on repairing it. This is what the house looks like currently. This is just a brief timeline of the case. This case actually goes back to 2017, but with this new owner as of the end of September. On the left, you'll see a photo of what it looked like when I brought it to council initially back in August. January, we had the house gutted, and this is what it looks like as of today in preparation for construction. He actually has a permit that was approved to build an addition on the back, which is why it's taken a while, because he had to get the blueprints for the addition. So again, my recommendation to council is to deny this ordinance. That'll send it back to staff, and we'll work with that new owner on getting that done. If that new owner fails to complete the work within a reasonable time, then we can issue him citations and bring it back before council again. So I'm here if there's any questions.
Any questions? So we need to take action?
Right. I think you do need to take action to deny the ordinance. Yes, sir.
Okay. We have a motion to deny the ordinance. Motion made by Councilmember Andrews, second by Councilmember Spears. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. Okay. Brings us to our next item of business, which is item PH2, which is an ordinance amending the Land Development Code, Chapter 18, for the various amendments and cleanup items related to permitted uses, dimensional requirements, site design, parking, signs, and landscaping. This time I'd like to recognize City Manager, Mr. Caudle. Mr. Caudle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Linda Painter, our Planning and Development Director, will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. This is public hearing number 2. There's our quarterly package of land development code amendments, something that we committed to as part of the rewrite to continue to go through and find issues in implementation and correct them. This is the same presentation that you saw a couple of weeks ago. We do have a couple of slides just to answer some questions that were asked at that time, but in general, I'm just going to run through those amendments very quickly if anyone has any additional questions. The first amendment is to permit urban farms and residential districts without a special permit. They would be subject to the existing conditions in the Land Development Code, as well as a new condition which would limit sales of products to those that are grown or produced on site. So they could not bring in products from off-site to sell if they are located in a residential district. The second amendment deals with townhouse units, and there are 2 items that we're proposing to do. One is to clarify that townhouses can be located on individual lots, which is shown in the diagram on the bottom of the slide. And the second is to permit townhouses up to 4 units subject to conditions in the R7 district to be consistent with the fact that we currently allow quadruplexes in that district subject to conditions. The third amendment deals with major vehicle repair, and this was in response to an applicant that came in looking to locate a major vehicle repair service in a light industrial district. Staff does believe that this is a reasonable change. As I mentioned last time, all the services that are involved are interior, and that is something we added the definitions as well as the standards on the next slide to demonstrate that the difference between major and minor repair. But as you can see, location of services and storage, section D1, all services shall be conducted indoors. So anything will be happening interior to a building, which is one of the reasons staff believes that this is appropriate in the light industrial district. Amendment number 4 deals with bicycle parking, and this is to correct an inconsistency that was the result of a November 2022 amendment when we relocated standards for the UMX district to the parking section. As shown in section 18-339, right now it says that except for bicycle parking, there are no minimum parking requirements. Before that November 2022 amendment, this applied to the UMX. When we moved it to the parking section, we wanted to clarify that the same general standards for UMX apply to the CBD. We did not realize, however, that section 18-342A4 specifically exempts developments in the CBD from required bicycle parking. And the reason for that is when you think about the central business district, buildings go lot line to lot line, so there's not a lot of room for on-site provision of those spaces. Traditionally, we've handled that through providing them within the public right-of-way and in parking decks. Amendment number 5, electric vehicle parking. There is no substantive change here. This is really just trying to amend the language to be clearer. Currently, it's a little confusing for both applicants and staff. So what you see on the screen in terms of 2% of provided spaces are being required to be electric vehicle ready with a full charging station exists in the regulations today, as does the requirement that 2% are required to be constructed with necessary infrastructure to permit conversion to full vehicle charging stations in the future. Again, there's no substantive change. This is what has been in place since December of 2021. However, we are trying to make the language a little bit clearer. There are no requirements in terms of the type of charging stations that are required, so staff has been accepting essentially what would be considered a level 1, which is a 120-volt single-phase outlet. Amendment number 6 deals with signs, and the proposal is to exempt local government signs on city or county-owned properties from signage regulations. Many of our government properties don't necessarily have buildings with frontages where we can calculate the amount of sign area and can be somewhat unique, such as the Riverwalk. So this proposal would exempt those properties from signage regulations for government uses. Amendment number 7, again, is to clarify provisions related to wall signs. It also does add some additional sign area because we are now distinguishing between ground floor signs and those signs that are mounted to the building above the ground floor. Amendment number 8 is to clarify a table to apply the pedestrian access and signage requirements. There is a table. There are 2 types of frontage types for semi-urban. We have semi-urban and semi-urban parkway. There's a table that identifies those regulations, and unfortunately, these 2 were supposed to be applied to both frontage types, but were inadvertently only applied to one. The map on the screen identifies the locations of those semi-urban frontage types in the city. Amendment number 9 is to simply add the word no for the phrase no more than. This was inadvertently left out when we did this, and we want to limit the amount of surface parking within the frontage on courtyard developments, not require that a minimum of at least 1/3 of the lot width be occupied by parking. Amendment number 10 deals with critical root zone, and both Amendment 10 and Amendment 11 deal with changes that were made to standards. This one was actually part of an amendment process, I believe in 2022, where we identified the 1.25 for every inch in trunk diameter. This was proposed to clarify and actually reduce calculations on a previous standard that had been adopted. However, when we made this change to the standard and adopted this figure, 18-316, we did not make a corresponding change to the definition. Normally, we try to keep those dimensional requirements out of definitions. However, there are some terms that we simply cannot define without them, and so we missed that when we made this amendment. Similarly, the significant tree revisions, the table that you see on your screen is in the standards. This is what has been applied. Dogwoods, magnolias, other ornamental flowering trees, and American hollies of 8 inches or larger are considered significant. Hardwood trees, longleaf pines, pocosin pines, black pines, and non-pine conifers of 18 inches or larger are significant. And other pine trees not specified are considered significant if they have a diameter breast height of 24 inches. And again, this is an inconsistency that we believe developed during the drafting of the code. We were able to locate minutes from the Joint Planning Commission and City Council meeting where the dimensions that are shown in the table were presented for consideration. And so those that you see in the table off to the right are what is currently in the definition that we're asking to correct, so that the significant tree in the definition for the hardwoods and the other pine trees would be 18 inches and 24 inches respectively for diameter or breast height. And that is it. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions, staff? Yes, sir. Ms. Spears?
Can you go back to the electric vehicle portion? Of course, all of council has seen we got some emails concerning this, and are we requiring, let me look over this before I ask the question, but. So is this private parking lots or what?
Yes. So any development in the city where they are providing on-site parking, 2% of those spaces are required to be have a full charging station, which from our standpoint is a 120-volt outlet. Then 2% are required to be constructed with infrastructure to permit conversion to full charging stations in the future. So basically electrical conduit to make that easy to make that conversion in the future.
Okay, 2 questions. What do you think that would cost a business to install, and is there a requirement that there has to be a certain number of spaces for this to trigger or no?
It's just 2% of provided spaces. So it's, if you have 50 spaces, that triggers 1. I believe, and I'll confirm with Brian, if you have less than 50 spaces, there are no spaces required, or is it still 1?
It would depend on the number below 50, because basically the fractions in the code are either round up or round down. So if it ends up being less than 0.5, then you'd round down to 0.
Okay. So that essentially less than 25.
I couldn't understand a thing Brian just said.
Brian,
Thank you, Charlie.
because of the use of fractions, rounding up and rounding down, if you have fewer than 25 parking spaces, no electric vehicle charging stations would be required. Starting at 25, because that would be 0.5 vehicle charging spaces, that goes up to 1. So between 25 and 50 spaces, you would be required to have 1 vehicle charging station. In terms of cost, that was a question that we received from Councilman Joyner. We do not have, or are not privy to developer costs. We did do some quick research, and depending on various sources and what you install, the level 1 stations, I want to say we're somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000. Level 2 were about $6,500, and then quite frankly, the level 3, the fast charge, that's where you're looking at, I want to say it's about $40,000 to $80,000. So those are, and again, we do not require level 2 or level 3. It's simply a vehicle charging station, which would be the equivalent of a level 1, which you can see on that image as being plugged into a wall, or in the case of a parking lot, an outlet that could be installed in a light pole.
Ms. Andrews?
I can tell you exactly how much it costs because I just had a level 1 and a level 2 installed. I had to have a 120-volt outlet installed for an electric gate, and right next to that I had a level 2 outlet installed for my vehicle charger, and the total cost for both of those jobs on a house that was built in 1962 was $1,700. So for the level 1 it was about $500, and for the level 2 it was about $1,200.
Mr. Waddell?
Yeah, I have some comments about amendment number 5. They're not really questions for staff, so I'll save those till we have some council discussion. But can we go to amendment number 11 briefly? And I don't have any requested changes to amendment number 11, but I do have something that's, I believe, germane to significant tree discussion. Twice within the last week, I've had property owners reach out to me for getting mitigation fines that caught them by surprise, that they felt were overly punitive in nature. And after kind of sitting down with them, I happen to agree. I think everybody up here wants to make sure that we're holding bad actors accountable, and they're out there, folks that'll go down there and cut down trees, you know, with impunity. But this one of them was a small HOA that, frankly, is a lot of elderly folks that reached out to somebody at Arboretum, saw a tree, a couple of trees that they took down that they assumed were dead, and they planted some more, and they get a mitigation fine. These folks are all on fixed income. They get a mitigation fine in the amount of like close to $20,000. Feels like we're the bad guy here, and maybe and the other was similar to that. Business owner just bought a piece of property that looks like it's on a residential, it was like a residential home that was converted to commercial along Wrightsville Avenue, had a tree that he thought was dead, according to him, and was worried about the property he just purchased, so he took it down. Mitigation fine, roughly $15,000, $20,000, something like that. These are big numbers for folks, and I just think that maybe I'd like to see if we could direct staff to take a look at our mitigation fines, understanding we're balancing holding bad actors accountable, but also not wanting to just hammer the general public who's otherwise just trying to do the right thing that they think they're doing with their property. Just a comment that I thought was germane to amendment number 11.
Mr. Rumble?
Up to that, those calls aren't the first. Those has been going on for quite a while. And recently we changed our ordinance. It used to be if you had a 2 acres less residential, you could cut. Now I think that's down to 1 acre now. And I had made the request from this seat a number of times over the years that a lot of people, I've had people say, how would I know that? How would I know? So the people that are, I mean, if they're out there cutting down a 1.5-inch sapling, they do it themselves. But generally, the people who are cutting trees, like I'm sure what Mr. Waddell is talking about, and the people that call me, tree companies do it, professional tree companies. And I asked, and I think that it took hold. I think we tried to contact every professional tree company in town, alerting them of the thing, because, you know, they're out there to make money. If they want that tree cut down, they'll cut it down. But if it's going to trigger these kinds of, I won't call them outrageous, but they're pretty stiff, because we're making them go out there and they look at the stumps, and then we do our computations on how much more they got to plant or pay money. The same holds true with fence companies. We have very strict ordinances that say from 40 feet from the street right of way back, you can only build 4-foot high fence. And sometimes I've seen it happen. There was one just the other day, and they got a 6-8 foot stockade fence right along the front. Now they're going to have a visit, and they're going to have to either take a chainsaw and cut it down to 4 feet or pay money or whatever. So I'm going to ask it again. Tree companies and fence companies, send them a letter and enclose that letter with our tree ordinance that says they can't do it, because, I mean, they're not bad actors, but they know better, or they should know better. And if they don't know better, we need to tell them, because these fines that these people are getting, hell, I wouldn't have, you know, if I cut one down by accident, somebody said I owed $15,000 or $20,000, I'd have to go to the bank. Don't know what I'd have to do. So, just, if you will, thank you.
Mr. Joyner.
My question is for staff, and it's a general question, but I'd like for you to walk us through 3 different pieces of it. What are the enforcement mechanisms on each of the 3 amendments that are in this presentation, which I'm curious about? Number 1 would be, what is the enforcement mechanism for the charging stations? Number 2 is for the significant trees, and number 3 is for the critical root zones.
So these are things that are typically looked at. In terms of charging stations, that would be, you need to show that on a plan to get your site plan approval. And then as part of the check for zoning compliance at construction completion, we would be looking to make sure that those were installed. Same thing for the critical root zones and the tree protection. All of that is looked at through site plan review and addressed as part of the ultimate permits that are issued, and then inspected before we issue a certificate of compliance. In the case of tree removal, and the examples that Councilman Waddell cited, those sometimes we get those by complaint. Sometime one of the examples cited was actually noticed by the city's forester. And so we are contacted if someone's removing a tree to determine if they had obtained the proper permits, and if they have not, our zoning compliance staff go out and issue a violation notice, and if there is a violation, a citation and associated fines.
Okay, so, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just to sort of repeat it back to you, I'm hearing that for the charging stations and for new construction, that's all through the permitting process, that's all through the standard review process. And then for the tree issue, a significant portion of it is not being actively monitored, it's being reported after the fact?
It can be noticed by staff, so if staff sees a tree staff sees trees being pruned or removed, they will go out and do those inspections. So we do have proactive inspections, but some of it is complaint-based. But the preservation piece of it is through the site plan process.
Understood, thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just quick.
Yes, Mr. Barnett?
Yeah, just a quick question with the trees. If a person wants to cut down a tree, aren't they supposed to like check in with the city first?
Yes. So we do have a tree removal permit process, and if there are no issues with removing that tree, so for example, if it's an unprotected tree, if it's on that, less than, or if it meets the requirements for exemption, we issue those permits.
So when somebody calls and says, I'm planning to take down some trees, then someone from the city will go out and look at the tree and determine.
They'll look at the tree, they will determine if you're taking down trees, is there any mitigation required? So mitigation does not have to be financial, it can be in terms of planting new replacement trees for what you're taking down, but that's part of the permit process.
Okay, thank you.
So, Ms. Reinberg.
Be clear with his question, you could cut down every tree in your yard if you wanted to without having to call the city. Because you're zoned residential and you're less than 1 acre. They're exempt. It used to be 2 acres, now it's 1 acre. My comments, just to follow, not to follow, but my comments are going back to the I think it was 6 about the EV. Well, I think it was 6 or 4 or whatever. 5, thank you.
6.
5. How did this come about? Was this driven by the public, or was that something the staff dreamed up, or how did this come about?
So, this predates me, so this has been in the code since the 2021 rewrite of the code. So what's before you tonight is because, quite frankly, as staff has read the language, as applicants have read the language, the way it was worded, it is very confusing. And so when we brought this forward, it was not to change the substance of the requirement, it was simply to say the way it's written is confusing. We want to rewrite it to be less confusing so that people understand what they're being asked to do. But in terms of the history, unfortunately, I don't have that. I don't know if Brian has anything.
It's all right. It's all right. This is something that, this is like us sticking our nose into a place where we don't need to stick our nose. This is something that a developer, and I know the developer word carries a bad connotation, but everything we work at, drive on, shop at, wherever, a developer built it. And if they feel like this is something that will enhance their product, they'll do it. But to be required, I think it just doesn't sit well with me, and I'm not in favor of that being a requirement. To me, that doesn't meet the standard of what this zoning district and what the permit says about the use of the property. It's like requiring somebody to build a fuel station to fuel cars, and I can't even come up with a very intelligent way of saying it. It's just that I'm against being required to put in either of these three. levels of charging for cars. I think that's something that, you know, if it's in demand, it'll get built, but I don't think it should be required. Thank you.
Mr. Waddell?
If there was a consensus on the council to amend the language for amendment number 5 to be not a requirement, but to still have some guidance on what we'd like to see, what would the verbiage need to look like specifically with these two? Would other items need to be changed?
If the council has concerns about this, I think staff's recommendation would be to not approve amendment number 5 and let us come back to you, give us some direction and let us come back to you in the next package, which we are currently working on.
But then we'd still have the existing roughly 2% that's in the land development code now.
Yes.
And when would the next code cleanup be?
I believe we're actually working.
I know I've asked you this 100 times, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I think we're actually looking at April Planning Commission for the next code cleanup amendment, Brian.
So May, us?
So May for you.
What did you just say? When you turn around, I can't read your lips.
I'm sorry. Our next quarterly cleanup package is scheduled for the April Planning Commission, so it'll be coming to you in May.
Thank you.
But your recommendation, sorry, Mr. Mayor, your recommendation would be, if there was consensus on this council to not move forward with this amendment and to have no requirement, then your recommendation would be to just not approve amendment number 5, let you guys circle the wagons and bring something back before this body.
With the direction of the council as to what you're looking for, rather than trying to do language on the fly here tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Spears?
So I'll just suggest that with this language, could we not look to incentivize to private property owners if they decided to do this instead of mandating this? And maybe you could think about what that incentive could be?
If that's the wish of the council, we will look into that, yes.
I mean, that's kind of what I'm leaning towards, but I don't know about the rest of these folks.
Sanders?
My understanding is that, excuse me, if we don't approve Amendment 5 tonight, we're just leaving basically the same requirements as if we approved it, just with more confusing language. Is that correct?
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to say is we met with a delegation from one of our sister cities in Dandong, China today, and very interesting, they have 2.1 million people in a footprint the same size as Wilmington. And the mayor asked them, you know, did they have any initiatives about climate change? And they mentioned that 40% of their vehicles are electric. And I was kind of blown away, you know, because we're really far behind. And part of it, you know, if there's not a demand for electric vehicles, it's because we don't have any place to charge them. For people who live in apartments, they don't have any place to charge them. And there is a demand with young people. They are concerned about climate change. And there is a demand there. And so they're forced to not be able to have an electric vehicle because they have no place to charge them, because they don't own their property and they're not able to put in a charging station. So I think it's an important thing. And I think that climate change is costing all of us. I did some quick calculations. The current thought is that it's costing every man, woman, and child in this country over $400 a year. And the biggest expense of home ownership right now is the increase in insurance, in homeowners insurance, which insurers are looking to double the cost of insurance for those of us living near the coast. I'm already paying more in property insurance than I am in property taxes. That's a lot of money, and that's going to continue to go up if we continue to ignore climate change and continue to not put in these forward-thinking, very simple ideas. And the final thing that I want to say is that there are companies out there that will put these charging stations in at no cost to the property owner. if you want to put in a level 2 or level 3 charging station, they will put them in, and it's just like a parking meter, and the company that owns them will collect the fees for them. So it is possible for property owners to do this at no cost. And with that, all.
Well, okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Barnett.
Okay, kind of a follow-up on Ms. Andrews. If we don't change, the challenge is the word required. But I'm understanding you to say that these charges are required if a person has 25 or more parking spaces.
Correct.
Okay. So which that seems like to me that's something that's really needed, you know. So, okay.
Well, let me just, to Linda's point, if we want a little bit more clarity to give staff, you know, some points to come back to us with that we could look at. You know, this has been kind of an issue that people have some concerns about, although I think the 120 vote phase 1 AC is about as low as you can get. I mean, that's just like plugging it into a wall somewhere around here. And I would imagine that any development is going to have plenty of places where you can plug something in at 120 votes. So I don't have a problem in letting staff taking a look at it and then coming back to us with a little bit more clarity and some more understanding if you think that you can come up with something that makes some sense. I know you'll try. And I'm not asking for anything, but it seems to me this has become a little bit of a contentious issue for whatever known reason. All of a sudden, I mean, we're not talking about a $15,000 or $30,000 charging station. We're talking about 120 volt. And like you said, you can put it on a light pole, because I've been looking around in some of the parking lots, the commercial parking lots, and a lot of these poles have places where you can plug in. I saw people plugging into them. So that's, you can tie it into somehow into the infrastructure, and I'd like to have a little bit more of understanding. And also what Celeste just shared with us about the possibility of companies that would be willing to come in and make those investments on their own if they wanted to. So I don't have a problem in us taking this particular piece out for staff to come back with a little bit more clarity, and we can talk about it some more. Go ahead.
I'm certainly fine with, you know, removing Amendment 5 and having them come back with clarity. My issue is I don't know if we've given them clarity, because it seems like this is a pretty contentious issue. I mean, I raised concerns a couple weeks ago regarding this proposal that is requiring all new parking lots and expansions of existing ones to include, it is requiring them all to include electric vehicle infrastructure and charging stations, irrespective of the property type, to Councilman Spears' question. This initiative, I said it before, it exemplifies government overreach, and I think the market forces, to Councilman Rydermark's points, should determine the necessity for EV charging stations. I think also that if we removed a mandate, that we'd likely see developers who see a value in EV charging stations are going to voluntarily exceed, and are currently already exceeding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have projects coming forward that developers are already exceeding our 2% mandate. I want to be clear again that I have no issues or objections to electric vehicles whatsoever. I find them quite impressive, pretty cool. I wish I could afford one myself. But I do remain staunchly opposed to a blanket mandate that contradicts two key pillars of our proposed strategic plan: to create a thriving, inclusive, and affordable community of neighborhoods, and to cultivate an environment for economic growth, job creation, and cultural vibrancy. In terms of the fostering affordable communities, a recent study conducted by the National Association of Home Builders and the National Multifamily Housing Council revealed that regulatory requirements imposed by various levels of government contribute on average to over 40% of multifamily development costs. That's what this is. This is a policy that will contribute to the lack of affordability that we talk about continually. Regarding the promotion of economic growth, this policy will impose an unjustifiable burden on business owners throughout the city who are either investing in our community for the first time, or they're choosing to expand their operations and increasing parking facilities to accommodate their clientele. We have today, council received emails from one of our largest private employers in the city regarding issues that they experienced this year with this existing mandate that was going to cost their business over $150,000, their words, that they had to, say, hey, this is either going to go to our employees or that we need to park, or we're just going to have to build this parking deck and parking lot with a bunch of EV stations that we do not need at present to run our business. So policies mandating compliance, particularly at the expense of private property owners, have far-reaching implications. They reverberate much further than just this issue. And they affect the affordability and economic vitality of our community and do so and already are doing so. So I would say my position, if we are going to remove this, would be to look at how to incentivize it. Sure, I think it's great, and I think a lot of folks are going to do it, but just not to require it in order to build your parking lot. Thanks.
Okay. What are the wishes of council? Yeah, we will. I'm just asking in respect to the amendment is to, if we move forward with this, and we'll open up the public hearing about this, is to give direction to staff to come back with a cleanup, I guess, in April, is what I understand. Somebody just tell me.
Yes, sir, it would be before you at the May meeting.
Okay, very good. All right. All right, this time I'm going to open up the public hearing and ask if anybody in the public wishes to speak on item PH2, if they'll come forward and state their name for the record. Madam Clerk, have you received any additional comments from the general public?
No, sir.
Okay. Are there any further questions from council? Okay, Ms. Spears?
I'm a little confused by Luke's affordability comment, especially when you mention a business owner. And so when we typically talk about affordability, we're talking about housing, correct? So we did receive that email and the discussion of how expensive it would be for them, which just made me think of how many parking spaces do they have? And they talked about trying to employ people and give people better jobs in this community. And I don't know if for what the median income is for that company, that's pretty much one person or two. You know what I mean? So I'm not disagreeing. I'm just kind of asking for some clarity on that statement, because it's a tad bit confusing when we mention affordability and then we're talking about a business. So if you could provide just some clarity on that,
certainly,
I'd appreciate it.
I was, Mr. Mayor, if I have the floor, yes, I was attempting to make two distinct points. The first was the affordability component, and that and how we have that in our strategic plan, or in our proposed strategic plan, and that from affordability standpoint, there's a study by the National Association of Home Builders that says regulatory requirements imposed by various levels of government on average contribute to 40% of multifamily development costs. So 40% of the cost is regulatory in nature. So what we're doing right now is a policy that would add to that, subtract from it. So that's the affordability component that I was discussing. The other was a completely separate, maybe they could be tangential, but that economic growth and vitality in our having vibrant businesses here is also part of our strategic plan, our proposed strategic plan, and that we have received information from one of our largest employers that they were adversely affected by the existing code, so their business would have economic impacts if they were to have built the parking lot that they were trying to build under our current code because it would have cost them about $150,000. So there were two distinct, and I apologize for not making that clear, but there were two distinct points I was attempting to make.
Okay. Ms. Sanders?
Everything we do is regulatory, and, you know, requiring windows to have glass in them instead of wax paper, yeah, that adds to the cost. You know, only 40% from government regulation, I think that's good because we want people to live in safe and healthy buildings, so I think that's a good deal.
Ms. Spears?
So I would think, and I'm a unofficial businessman, but if a person would, not illegal though, if a person or if a company were to have to take on these costs, it seems to me that they would incorporate them into their plan to build and pass those costs on or spread it out over a period of time where it doesn't impact the project in such a manner. And I think the businesses that we know that will flourish will do that. So, I mean, I get it. I do, and I didn't expect to be as involved in a conversation about electric vehicles and parking spaces, but it's true, you know, and a lot of times we sit here in their presentations and we get all of these emails and, you know, you have to be able to decipher, you know, where we are realistically and when someone is kind of trying to pull the shade on us. And I'm not accusing anyone of that, but, you know, there's an opposite side of the coin, and I believe that people are savvy enough to absorb this and pass it on in a decent and subtle way where no one goes out on a tangent or loses any hair or any sleep over it. I'm gonna be done with it.
Mr. Barnett?
I think one of the points that I think we still want to make sure that we keep in our forefront is the environment. You know, this is going to help us to protect the environment, and I am certain that there will be more electrical cars in the near future. The last thing I would share is that oftentimes, if we don't, quote unquote, encourage people to do the right thing, oftentimes people have a tendency to cut corners. So, but I'm definitely in favor of sending it back to staff and having them work through it.
Okay. Mr. Joyner?
I'm in favor of having this as a part of our requirements. I think that the sooner that we transition to an electric fleet, both in the city, the sooner that we make the cultural transition to an electrical fleet, and I'm a part of the problem because I'm not there yet, the better we'll be. The fewer gas stations that are going to come to us for approval throughout Wilmington. And I'm ready to vote today, but if my colleagues are not, I'm curious as to what we're asking for clarification on that we're telling staff they need to bring us next time.
Mr. Ravenbar?
You know, a lot of this electric vehicle hype that has come down the road at us is there's unintended consequences that have come with it. For example, Hertz is selling every one of all their electric vehicles. There's no demand for it. Ford Motor Company, their truck division is doing away with, they're scaling extremely deep, doing away with their electric vehicle program. What do you do with these things when they're done? It's an environmental nightmare. These things can be dangerous in your garage. They can explode. And I'm with Luke on this. I've ridden in one. They're nice. They're quiet. They're this, that, and the other. But in my opinion, the people that are most able right now to provide this service would be the gas stations. I mean, we're approving 2 and 3 acre convenience stores, and folks, they ain't convenience stores no more like we grew up with. These things are department stores. You can go in and buy your week's groceries at some of them, and I've been in them. So they don't have parking spaces, so to speak, like a strip center or an apartment complex. So they've kind of fallen under the radar, but maybe we should require them to put in an ample number of charging vehicles and let them make the money on it.
I guess from my perspective is, I'd like to know a couple of things. Number one, this ordinance, or this part of the Land Development Code has been in here since 2021. First of all, I'd like to know how many projects, Linda, that we have approved with these requirements that were to be put in place. I'd like to see a couple of them. I'd like to see some examples where I can drive by and take a look at them, number one. Number two, I'd like to really delve down into the actual, I know you looked at some of the cost, but I'd really like to delve down into the cost. I mean, I'm hearing things where people are saying $100,000, and you're telling me $1,500, $1,700 for the 120-volt one, which is the lowest threshold. So I'd like to really delve into that and just take a look at it and see, is there that much of a burden on the people that are doing the development to such a degree that it would really hurt them that much? And I need to hear that, because I've heard that from some of the people in the Home Builders Association, but we're not talking about residential, we're only talking about commercial, correct? Residential or everything? Apartments. Is it apartments only?
Pardon me?
I'm not talking to you, Tony, I'm talking to Linda. Linda, I'm sorry. Linda, can you hear me? Is your microphone on? Or maybe Brian, you can tell me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It would be any parking lot that provides 25 or more spaces,
25 or
regardless
more,
of
so
use.
primarily in commercial, apartments, multifamily.
Right. Well, as you remember, when we adopted the new code, we eliminated the minimum parking requirements for most of the commercial uses unless they're within a certain distance of residential. So it would be primarily, if they're parking it to meet their demand, it would be, I would think it would be more of apartments.
Well, then I would imagine since 2021, we've had quite a few that have been approved, correct?
Yes, but we can get that information to
I would
you.
like to see it.
Yes, sir.
Okay? That's personally what I'd like to get more clarity on. Well,
So,
Mr. Waddell?
so if there's consensus here on that, our motion would just be to approve all the amendments and continue amendment number 5?
That's correct. Sean, you got it.
I was just going to say, if that's the motion that comes forward, that's actually section 11 in the ordinance. But it's amendment 5 in the presentation, but 11 in the proposed ordinance.
Yeah, I'll move that
Okay,
way.
let me since I haven't seen anybody there, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for the wishes of council.
I move to approve, I move to approve the amendments to the Land Development Code, except amendment number 5 or section number 11, and find it to be consistent with the relevant policies in the comprehensive plan based on the application materials and the information provided at the public hearing and in the staff report, and to find approval of the request is reasonable and in the public interest for the following reasons. The proposed changes will correct issues uncovered during implementation of the new Land Development Code.
Okay. All right, everybody ready to vote? All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Councilman Rivenbark, second by Councilmember Spears. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. And that item will be brought back to us on April in our April meeting.
It'll actually be in the code
May, I'm
amendments
sorry,
that you hear in May.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you, sir. All right. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item PH3, which is resolution of the City Council of the City of Wilmington, North Carolina, authorizing the negotiation of an amendment to an installment financing contract in an amount not to exceed $32 million to finance various city projects, including streets, sidewalks, riverwalk, a sports complex, and related property, and providing for certain other related matters thereto. At this time, I'd like to recognize our city manager, Mr. Cottle. Mr. Cottle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jennifer Moretti, our Finance Director, will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members. The public hearing tonight is concerning the 6th Amendment to the 2012 Financing Installment Contract and the 2024A Series projects to be financed. The 2024A Series limited obligation bonds will be used to finance various capital improvement projects, as well as refinance the 2014 limited obligation bonds in a total amount not to exceed $32 million. Approval of the resolution will authorize staff to proceed with all matters necessary for the installment financing. The resolution also authorizes the removal of the command center from collateral on the 2012 deed of trust. This financing will be secured by payments from the city and the deed of trust. Other collateral held on the 2012 deed of trust includes several fire stations, the operations center, the police fire training facility, and the Skyline Center building. The projects covered with this financing include street and sidewalk projects totaling $15.1 million, Riverwalk North Marina concrete repair for $3 million, Water Street Park bulkhead of $1.7 million, and additional improvements to the site work for Encino Sports Complex for $1 million. For Council's calendar approval, we brought to you a resolution back on February 20th, which authorized the actions for us to take for the limited obligation bonds, as well as call for the public hearing tonight. Tonight, we're holding the public hearing on this contract amendment. We are asking Council to approve a resolution to authorize the issuance of the limited obligation bonds, as well as authorize the release of the command center from the 2012 deed of trust. Other dates pertaining to this financing, we are on the Local Government Commission's calendar on April 2nd for their approval of this financing. We'll be pricing these bonds on April 25th. Closing for this financing will be on May 15th, and then we'll be back before Council in May for the approval of the financing ordinance. And with that, if you have any questions for me.
Are there any questions, Ms. Moretti? Thank you, Ms. Moretti.
Thank you.
At this time, I'm going to open up the public hearing and ask if anybody in the public wishes to speak on item PH3. Madam Clerk, have you received any additional commentary?
No, sir, I have not.
Okay. Are there any further questions from council? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for the wishes of council. I have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Barnett, second by Council Member Andrews. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our resolutions. Item R1 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Wilmington and Beaches Convention and Visitors Bureau to provide tourism enhancements utilizing $650,000 of American Rescue Plan Act funding. This was continued from our March 5th, 2024 meeting, and I'll ask for this item to be continued because the presentation will be made to council at our budget retreat on Friday, correct?
Yes, sir. We are prepared to make a budget presentation to you at the budget workshop. You may continue this item either to that date, or you may continue it until April the 2nd, which will be the next meeting at which you'll be regularly scheduled, and you can act on it at that point in time. It's entirely up to council.
Well, I know that Kim is prepared to make a presentation to council at the budget retreat. I don't know if we'll take action at that point in time. At that point in time, if we decide to take action, we could, but if not, we could move that to an item to April, correct?
Certainly, yes, sir.
All right, then I'll ask for it to be continued to for Friday.
Yes, sir.
Friday at our budget retreat meeting.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have a motion to continue by Councilmember Joyner, second by Councilmember Waddell. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item R2, which is a resolution authorizing filing of condemnation action for the acquisition of right-of-way and easements for Greenville Loop Trail Section 3, project parcel numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 25, 26, 29, 32, 35, and 36, as shown in Map Book 73 at page 57 of the New Hanover County Registry of North Carolina. So I'm going to, this time, I'd like to recognize our city manager, Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whitley Stavish with the City Attorney's Office will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. The resolution before you tonight is to authorize the filing of condemnations for the Greenville Loop Trail Section 3 project. We have 14 potential condemnations that we will need to file with the Clerk of Court's office. As of today, we actually have 13, as we've settled one. These acquisitions consist of right-of-way, temporary construction easements, permanent drainage easements, and permanent utility easements in order to build the multi-use path. Acquisition needs to be completed by the middle of April in order to stay on our construction schedule and bid the project. This is a map of the various properties that we will be filing condemnations on. This is at the corner of Oleander and Greenville Loop Road. This is the remainder of Greenville Loop Road. We have sent letters to all property owners. We have reached out to all owners prior to filing. We will continue to reach out to owners in an effort to settle the condemnations before we have to file. 5 potential condemnations have agreed to settle but have not closed at this time, and we will continue to negotiate and try to resolve these issues in order to avoid litigation. Some of the barriers to resolution has been a lack of response from property owners. There are multiple commercial properties along this corridor, which adds an extra layer of difficulty. And the timing to stay on the construction schedule really inhibits us from being able to come to an agreement with property owners any later than we can. So, do you have any questions?
I know you all have been working very hard to get this project. I know this is from our 2014 transportation initiative, and those people voted. They went to the polls and voted overwhelmingly to support this project. And I'm sorry it's taken as long as it has, but I know we have to go through a process in this in this country, and appreciate all the hard work you folks have been doing in the legal department to try to resolve a lot of these so we can get this project done.
Thank you.
Not only for the safety of the people that are walking and jogging and enjoying the outdoors here, but because the voters voted for it. And we need to stay on this timeline, and it's unfortunate that we've had to get to this point, but I know that you all have tried diligently to try to resolve a lot of these issues. And I know a lot of them are very small in nature, and I understand the magnitude of and the work that you all have done in the legal department. I really appreciate all your hard work in trying to make this thing happen. Appreciate it. Thank you. What are the wishes of council in respect to the motion, to the item? We have a motion to approve by Councilman Rivenbark, second by Mayor Pro Tem Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item R3, which is a resolution adopting the Greenfield Park Master Plan. At this time, I'd like to recognize the city manager, Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Amy Beatty, our Parks and Recreation Director, will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and City Council. I don't have any prepared remarks for you this evening since you were presented with a comprehensive overview of this plan at your meeting on February 20th, but I am here to answer any questions that you might have.
You know, I know that we talked about this several years ago. I know that myself and Mr. Rivenbark had concerns, and we'd heard it from the community. And as the Greenfield Lake Amphitheater has really ramped up over the years, and the activity that is going on in the park, it's high time we really start focusing on really making that a beautiful place again. And I know that y'all have done a tremendous amount of work out there. You've got park rangers, and I know we've got our challenges, but this is a first step in really getting a hold of one of the prettiest places in Wilmington. I remember it as a kid, and it was just gorgeous, and it has the opportunity to go back to its glory days. And I just appreciate all the hard work that you and staff and everybody's done in making this come forward, so we have a plan of action that we can work on and move forward with. So I appreciate it, Amy.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. What are the wishes of council in respect to the resolution? We have a motion approved by Councilman Rivenbark, second by Councilmember Andrews. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. Thank you. At this time, we have reports. It's item RP1, Council's Appointments Committees for Boards and Commissions. Councilmember Rivenbark, who is the chairman of that committee, will give us a report. Mr. Rivenbark?
I chair the Appointments Committee, and I'm on that committee with Councilwoman Celeste Andrews and Councilmember Luke Waddell. And on that day, we made the following recommendations to present to council this evening. The first one is the Cape Fear Public Transportation Authority to appoint Councilmember Celeste Andrews to that. Thank you for doing that. And also in the Encino Sports Park User Advisory Group, we appoint Ingrid Corby to represent Parks and Recreation from Parks and Recreation Advisory Board with a term to expire 10/17/25. On item number 2 and item number 4, we're going to hold that over to our next meeting, which will be, I think that'll be April the 2nd. April the 2nd. And with that, I would make the motion to accept these reports, this report.
We have a motion to approve by Councilman Rivenbark, second by Councilmember Waddell. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. This concludes the regular agenda. Are there any items to be brought forward by our city manager? Thank you. Madam Clerk? Okay. Mr. Joyner?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I told you that the Cape Fear Council of the Boy Scouts of America had announced some new Eagle Scouts, and I did not quite have their information ready, but I wanted to congratulate tonight William Glockner from Troop 232 and Jake Allen from Troop 26. Congratulate them on their hard work, recently becoming Eagle Scouts, and thank them for the community service projects that they led here in our community as a requirement to becoming Eagle Scouts. And then I also wanted to remind folks again that on Saturday, May 11th, the Loud Music Company and the Hot Flashes are just two of the musical artists who are going to be performing at Greenfield Lake Amphitheater, and it looks like tickets are about $40 for that show. I really want to encourage people to support local artists, to support that venue, and the more that we pour into that, the more opportunities for local artists we'll be able to use at Greenfield Lake.
Thank you. Mr. Waddell? Mr. Barnett?
Yeah, happy Women's Month this month, and we encourage you to be thoughtful about that. And then the one thought I had today was I read a quote that said, "Be the caring adult that you wish you had when you were growing up." And that's the challenge I give to adults. We met with our sister city, and I raised the question to them. I said, do you have any problems with youth crime? And they sort of chuckled. And then they said, well, we really don't. But his response was, it's because parents stick with their kids. They teach them morals and responsibilities. And I think we need to continue to do that as the whole community. So,
thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Rivenbark?
Yes, sir. I'd like to shout out to the New Hanover High School boys basketball team. It's a darn shame they had to lose. They won 32 ball games this year. That's the most in the history of New Hanover High School. And there have been some great teams there over the years. And going back a bit, the New Hanover High School ladies lacrosse team kind of got a bad deal in their championship game. They scored the winning goal and got it taken away from them. And I'd really like to have someone, and I'll be glad to do it, reach out and have those two groups come down. And also the Hoggard ladies basketball team, they were in the playoffs and did very well. And unfortunately, our local paper doesn't give enough print to it. So these children are playing sports. They're doing well in school, and they deserve a pat on the back and some acknowledgement from us, if nobody else. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Andrews?
I wanted to acknowledge that Wilmington made the New York Times on the 17th. One of our residents, Mad Abu Ghazala, who is a Palestinian American who had a sanctuary for rescued dogs on the West Bank. And because the conditions were deteriorating, he had to shut down his shelter because of the conflict in the Middle East. And he ended up flying 69 dogs out of the West Bank, and they landed in New York City on the 17th. So lucky dogs on St. Patrick's Day, and congratulations to my friend Maud for rescuing them.
Spears?
Yes, sir. I too want to congratulate the New Hanover High School boys basketball team. I was rooting for them, even though I'm a Viking. I was rooting for them. I was hoping they would bring that home for New Hanover County, and also congratulations to the John T. Hargett girls basketball team. I was definitely rooting for them. We just came up a little bit short, but I tell you, you have to look at New Hanover County as we're getting up there. You know, we're being recognized in the state, and it's a beautiful thing. And you know, if you're a native Wilmingtonian, you know how the rivalry goes. But we all come together at the end of the day, and it's a beautiful thing, and especially to see these children thrive. So that's just great. And also I want to say another huge shout out to the law enforcement community. On, what was it, Saturday night, I had the opportunity to go to the checkpoint. So I was out there with WPD and watching what was taking place, and just saw everything that was happening. And you know, I saw Chief Williams, some of the toys that he has out there, but it was a good thing, and just to see hands-on, and I got the opportunity to go into the Batmobile, and Mark Andrews, I think he used to work for WPD, he gave me a real thorough tutorial about drunk driving. He said it's not drunk driving, it's impaired driving, and you know, blowing and all of that stuff. I even took a little breathalyzer, which came back 0000 for anybody who wants to know that. And just you know, taking advantage of being informed about what goes on in our community. So I just want to say thank you and enjoy.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Barnett.
I also want to shout out to Pastor Campbell and the members of New Beginning. They were at the County Commissioners meeting on yesterday. They were approved to do 128 houses for workforce houses for teachers and police officers and firemen. And so I just want to congratulate him and his team for being so consistent and making that happen.
I just want to also congratulate New Hanover High School basketball team. That was a tremendous run, and you know, came up a little short, but to have two schools from New Hanover County, New Hanover High School and Hoggard High School, play in championship football and basketball games is a testament to the athleticism that we have in this community, but also the young people that are dedicating themselves to their sport. And I just want to say congratulations to them. And finally, I just want to say to our city staff, to our police department, what a St. Patrick's Day. I know that me and Celeste were in the parade. I didn't realize that Wilmington had that many Irish people, but anyway, it was a phenomenal, I think, parade, and it's the biggest crowds I've ever seen, and the town was painted green, and I just want to say, way to go, guys. Way to put on a nice show, and the organizers that put it together did a great job, and I just want to say thank you. It was a great festive event, and I was proud to be part of it. So with that, thank you for taking an interest in your government.